Akshay, welcome to Stories in AI. Fascinating to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Ganesh, for having me on this. It's really a great show, and I'm looking forward to uh, contribute any which way I can.
No, I think it's going to be that the audience are going to love this show because you and I have a lot of geek out sessions talking about the state of AI and stuff. Now you're at Lyric as chief AI officer. You're doing a lot of things in like an industry like healthcare. We'll come to all of that. But why don't you kick us off with your background? Tell us who's Akshay. Tell us your story.
Absolutely, and I'll try to keep it short because I've been working for a while. So maybe the last 13 to 14 years of my life, I've been an entrepreneur. And I did not start in healthcare. I actually started building technologies in ad tech, I would say. One of the things that I always struggled being an entrepreneur doing things in ad tech was I never found that for me, for my own moral compass, a value coming out of that. So, but prior to that, I had some exposure working at a contract research organization, CROs, and I saw firsthand what it looks like to analyze data for late stage, diseases, especially, like cancer and cardio diseases. And it seemed pretty impactful that we could bring sort of data analysis to move the needle there and understand, like, what are the opportunities there. So that got me sort of going back to healthcare because I always found it to be valuable to do something there. So that leaving AdTech, I joined a company called Human API, where end of the day, we ended up building sort of a universal API for all of health data. So started with device data, but then we quickly added like clinical data, labs, pharmacies, and this is prior to like Apple Health even existing. So we were one of the pioneers and being able to build this API based and consumer control, meaning that the patient authorizes data exchange. So learned a lot doing that because that was sort of the baptism by fire to understand how difficult healthcare is. Healthcare and healthcare data, nothing actually interoperates. There have been like measures on wanting to bring interoperability, but and FHIR was a standard that was emerging back then, and I'm talking about 2014. But even with all of that at play, getting data from point A to point B and using it for something that a patient or a member or a human cares about was almost impossible. So now we see a lot of attempts have happened since then. Obviously, Apple Health leading the way. Human API did well as well. So we see that these are like absolute base infrastructure on which we can build other types of health applications. So I left Human API to like sort of build a startup where I saw that the phones were getting really powerful. The camera on the phone was incredibly good. You could back in the day in 2015, 2016, you could do OCR on the phone. And with the early sort of arrival of deep learning models to do a vision, specifically vision-based models, I realized that we could apply that for extracting medical information from text, from basically pieces of paper. A lot of like healthcare data is still on paper, surprisingly, right? So how do you use that to extract certain relevant information? So that product that I was working on caught the eye of founders from AI, Walter and Sam, and they reached out to me to see if I was interested in joining forces and building out that in a more grander perspective for clinical trials and observational clinical trials specifically. So I ended up like becoming the CTO of AI, where we sort of had a very storied ride to say because we ended up building a lot of privacy preserving, giving more, empowering patients more to do things with their health data on their phones. So not just vision bar models, but also like using audio and geolocation models and use that in a very specific set of use cases, like say clinical trials. Do you qualify for clinical trials? Can you find observational trials? So it was always about empowering the patient, and that's the journey I've been on for the last more than a decade. And as part of that, I got the great opportunity to work with a lot of talented people, including Rajiv Ronanki, who was leading some of the digital initiatives at Elevance. Ended up collaborating with him, and then he convinced me that where we are with Lyric is where the future is going. So yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, I have always like sort of fancied using data and AI and things. I took a small break between doing healthcare to go back into deep tech, built a company around sort of edge computing. So how do you like take privacy aspects of not just healthcare for any type of data and move those to edges. So that's been my journey. Looking forward to share whatever I've learned along the way.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And for the audience, right? So first of all, what a fascinating journey. And like you've really gone into the gut of healthcare, solving the hardest problems around data to make the most impact by actually empowering patients and members at the other end of it, right? So for the audience, I think Lyric Health is a payment accuracy and payment integrity company. They've launched a new platform, Lyric AI and Lyric IQ, and my company, Autonomize AI, is also a partner with them. So we strategically partner on getting AI, using AI to transform workflows for the patient for the better, right? So what do you do as your role as the chief AI officer at Lyric? Where just give us a day-to-day view of this, right? Because there's a lot of things happening in the
Uh,
world right now.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because first of all, I want to say that, it's great partnering with you, and definitely you personally, but also with Autonomize, because I think the way we are seeing the world of payment integrity and payment accuracy in general evolve, we need a lot more ways to understand the data and make decisions that are not easy just looking at structured data. So for the uninitiated, payment accuracy and payment integrity is that part of the healthcare that looks at billions and billions of claims and uses the right set of protocols and logic and rules to make and adjudicate those claims. And these rules and claims are not decided on a whim. These are actually decided by HHS and state, and a lot of mandates and government policies are being used to sort of drive these decisions. And Lyric has been in this business for more than 25 years. So we are a market leader. We have proprietary data and knowledge on this. A lot of this is rule driven today, but we have built the repository of knowledge base on which we can actually make these decisions. So where we are going as a company is, how do you think about accuracy and payment accuracy in a broader term? That means that doing just not just prepay editing, which is where you apply rules for incoming claims to make decisions, but then you're looking at it a broader sort of strokes and asking the question: Are there faster ways we can actually adjudicate a claim? What typically takes sometimes weeks, can we do it in minutes? And especially on post-pay, things like fraud-based and abuse, or even coordination of benefits or itemized bill review, these typically can go from weeks to months, sometimes even years. So how do we bring that into sort of shift left that into sooner is
Yep.
sort of the overarching charter under which I'm operating. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, it's interesting, and Lyric, as you know, as you said, a market leadership position, you see a lot of these data flow through the system, and you're setting the
Mm-hmm.
foundation to innovate beyond just payments, right? So, like, payment is definitely one focus, but the one of the theses that,
Mm-hmm.
and you and I talk about it all the time, that I always believed in was, health tech innovation over the last decade was always about picking a narrow, vertically integrated problem and just go solving it end to end, right? As a result,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to the benefit that it also brings another challenge, which is healthcare, has an interoperability problem. Healthcare has a data siloing
Mm-hmm.
problem, and you exacerbate the problem. So that's why you have United Health has got probably 500 vendors for telehealth, right? So it just doesn't make any sense, and each of them is a different silo. So really, really excited about Lyric's approach to this problem of how do you really think of it from a ground up perspective, like set the data foundation, solve the problems across the continuum,
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. um, Let me switch gears to AI, right? A lot of things
Mm-hmm.
happening in the world today. It's the hottest topic at World Economic Forum, where Rajiv was. It's the hottest topic in any meetings you go into. People that hardly knew what AI was about a year ago is now experts thanks to ChatGPT and the accelerated learning curves. So give us a view of the land on how you see where is AI today, what is it really good at,
Mm-hmm.
what is a now opportunity versus how it's evolving into the future.
It's a great question. So, honestly, we are in the AI summer, and hopefully, we are actually in the AI spring because I still expect a lot more to come with what's possible with AI, right? So where we are today, if you think about the recent breakthroughs in sort of the language models becoming a lot more easy to like understand and deal with. Like I still remember back in I was we were one of the early adopters of GPT-2, and we were trying to like the concept of prompts are still very early back then, but what we have seen since 2019 to like obviously the GPT 3.5 breakthrough that happened in 2022 to like sort of bigger models coming our way, and especially open source models. What we're witnessing is sort of spurt of activity that we are understanding that these language models can, used under the right sort of guided way, can actually be really useful for certain types of jobs to be done, right? So that's the aha thing that I have realized. Previously, I've worked with several versions of machine learning, including deep learning models, and they have worked in certain narrow, like sort of field of view of doing things, but none of the AI has been general enough to use it for across a broad set of tasks. But with large language models, again, I would not quote that they are still ready in a very general sense, but you can take the underlying sort of models and be able to use it for a very specific set of tasks. So that's one, I think, key breakthrough that we're seeing. The second thing I think is there is a revolution obviously going on in how this has become a democratized way of seeing more new ideas coming almost every day. I can't even keep up with the number of papers that are coming our way or the number of models being published. But what I'm seeing here is that obviously there are closed source proprietary models like OpenAI's, but then betting on the open ecosystem, we are seeing obviously like what Meta is doing with Llama 2, but also like other participants like Microsoft and
Mistral.
Anthropic and others who are pushing out like more and more open models. This allows us to sort of have an ecosystem of options. So we can use these models to basically get our jobs done. And we can go into what those jobs look like specifically in the areas they shine.
No, it's fascinating. I think you're like a couple of things to call you just to reinforce what you said, right? One is definitely, I mean, language as a medium of like you're short circuiting, right? Earlier, you used to say something to
Mm-hmm.
somebody, they have to then translate it into a spec, and then they actually go have to write the code for it, and then go get the work done, right? Now that whole thing just gets short circuited. It becomes a medium of human to human interaction or human to machine interaction, and all of the other combinations, right? So it's fascinating. I think language
Machines, right?
definitely is a huge thing. I do think though, I mean, like, and I know you and I talked about this before too. Multimodal is the next frontier when you can really go in from
Mm-hmm.
representations. Like end of the day, even like we talk about it, text messaging and stuff. Like we're squeezing all the bandwidth of everything that we're thinking into these two fingers. That the word rate per second is actually much lower, right? Than just our thoughts. So
Right.
representing data in the most natural, multidimensional way to compute on it is definitely an evolution we're excited about too, right? Um, I love
Absolutely.
the other
Yeah.
thing that you mentioned, which is like while so the open source movement, huge believer in that. I think you're exactly
Mm-hmm.
right. I mean, eventually in the long term, in the long run, open source will play out. And I want to actually the flip side of
Mm-hmm.
this is actually there's a lot of fear mongering. We'll come to that. I want to hear your thoughts on that too.
Mm-hmm.
But then the notion that so one, you have an ecosystem of capabilities to choose from. It and improves choice for innovators, entrepreneurs, organizations to go do it. But the more important thing that what you actually said, which really caught, I think we're aligned on that, right? Which is you'll have this large generally capable model, the path and a march towards AGI, and then you'll
Mm-hmm.
find these task-based expert models that are just focused on one task, and it
Mm-hmm.
does it really really well. I mean, we at Autonomize, we built clinical large language model, and we didn't even call it a large language model at the time when we built it, right? But it does one thing and one thing really really well, which is understand and extract medical information,
Mm-hmm.
bioentity signals, and summarize and synthesize that kind of information, right? It's an expert model, much smaller footprint. It can be actually chained with other models and
Mm-hmm.
larger language models and so forth. I definitely do believe that that's going to be the future of how we're doing. You're going to have this interplay of multiple models that come together to go do it, right?
Yep.
Um, Explore that a little bit more for me in terms of, if you don't mind, right? Just going into saying, look, what are
Yeah.
those jobs to be done, right? How do you break down this, massive problem and break it into little things, and then have little agents actually
Yeah.
do this thing. And we goofed around with this idea a lot during our TED AI meetup, right? So just explore that for me a little bit.
Yeah, I think your framing is exactly what we are actually witnessing within Lyric as well. Instead of having a very general purpose large model that has a sort of a worldly view on things that you can reason with, where we are seeing more bang for the buck, for a better word, is actually having small large language models that are hyper specialized in certain small areas of domains, right? So think of it like, okay, within the world of payment integrity, we are obviously looking at the content itself that comes from CMS and states, and we need to understand what that means.
Amazing.
Basically, these are governance and policies on how to adjudicate claims, right? So these are written in. There are hundreds of thousands of these documents written in PDFs by clinicians, basically, and we need to understand that and parse that and make that into codable logic, right? So for me, that's a specialized domain, and we can use the a very generalized model, but unless we are able to like sort of fine tune it or use the right like RAG systems to go with it with the right level of prompts, we can't get the best out of it. And to run it at cost for us, we look at like small large language models that we can either run on very cheap GPUs, and in fact we can even run a lot of them
Yeah.
on CPUs as well. So we've been able to like crack that efficiency gain, so our cost to like operationalize this goes down. But where I see that expand is this was just one area of what payment integrity looks like. But then when you add layers like what about coordination of benefits? What about eligibility data? What about membership data? What about like, clinical data? So we have so many small subdomains with its own intricacies. And we talked about how the data is not really interoperable between them because different standards have emerged over years, and they've all been duct taped in some sense to like make it all work. And we have humans in the loop sometimes to like say, okay, this data is in this way, we'll FTP this somewhere in this place so you can act on it. What we're seeing is that without having to like sort of boil the ocean of getting all the data in a single standard, which doesn't happen because it's not under one single entity, we can apply sort of specialized models on the edges. And even if the data is like very hyper specialized or structured in a certain way for one domain, it can still be conversant with another on the other side, either to like a programmed API or to another language model on the
Yep.
other side, right? So this is sort of the emergence of what I call as agents for the jobs to be done. And by keeping small large language models specialized for certain jobs to be done, we think we can build an orchestra. In our world, we call it a playlist. Being lyric and as a musically sounding company, we like to use these phrases. So we can build this playlist of like agents that can talk to each other and converse across data domains, right? So this is, I think, where I think there is a big, for us, we are seeing efficiency gains, and this is where our research is actually going in lyric as well.
That is awesome. What a fascinating world we live in, right? I think it's just like it is any if it's a there's a we used to say this even before the last winter, right? We're in like if you can teach an algorithm something, it'll do it better than the human being, right? I mean, if you the catch is can you
Yeah.
get the right data? Can you help it understand it? Can you go do it? And I think on the one hand, this I mean, I love the whole creating an army of these LLMs or LLM agents, if you will, that are all specialized. Like
Mhm.
one area that we have been seeing a lot of, it's interesting. I mean, not applicable for every use cases, but the AutoGen framework, right? We're in conversational, multi-conversational agents to solve a problem. So as you know, we
Mm.
very heavily focused on prior authorization as a entry point for most of our customers, right?
Yep.
We start there, it's huge efficiency gains, and we make the whole experience a lot more relevant. But that data is so valuable, we then use it for quality, risk adjustments, all of that stuff downstream, all the clinical data. You
Mhm.
merge it with some claims data, you merge it with some call center data, you merge it with eligibility data. It kind of solves a whole array of problems. One interesting, and it's still more research oriented that we have done is created this conversational agents who are specialists in certain kind of data types. Similar idea what you're saying, but
Mhm.
less on the transformation side, more on the kind of reasoning side. I mean, it's a cool demo. It shows us a good demo, but it's really I don't think it's prime time to go deploy in production. But the ability to have
Mhm.
not just one, instead of having like if you have one AI system that is kind of adjudicating against guidelines. Imagine having three of them, who
Mhm.
one is specialized in musculoskeletal surgery procedures. The other one is specialized in, understanding about patient experiences. The third one is specialize in something else. Them having a conversation to rationalize and build a summary for the nurse to actually take a look and say, you
Mhm.
know what, this may actually be, even though I don't meet all the guidelines here, because there's a lot of that gut-based decision that are being made, right? Because the nurses have the
Right.
front-end experience, and they're like, well, ideally, this is not a compliant procedure, but I'm looking at their auth history, I'm looking at their medical history, I'm looking at their claims history. Maybe
Mhm.
we should just approve this because this is going to lead to a lot more abrasion for the patient than us trying to save a few dollars here, right? And it's a regulated process. You got to
Yeah.
document it. You got to do this thing. So we're seeing the emergence of how do you use, like just like how humans do, have a conversation among two or three experts,
Mhm.
find out the right thing, and then prioritize that, and then rationalize that against this thing. And today you can do that all in software with LLMs, right? So it's
Absolutely.
fascinating, this world
Yep.
that we live in, right? How this is going to shape up. Love the. I'm really,
I mean, it
yeah.
is shocking. It is shocking how fast it's actually becoming very real. And I want to like first of all, I want to like absolutely say like the stuff that autonomized AI has brought to the table for Lyric, especially around prior auth and HEDIS scoring, and these are complex domains where you need multimodal data. I mean, obviously you need clinical data which has a different frequency than claims data, and then you potentially have like PDFs coming in for
Yep.
bills and other things. So making that decision, what I call this as is like sort of what's the purpose of somebody in healthcare, right? What's the real purpose? Because I think LLMs allow us to ask that question going forward. For me, I think for healthcare, it is about like giving back time for people to care for people, right? Like, and if you look at nurses or clinicians are sitting there trying to chase data, right? Like the data, even if the data is centralized, they are not compatible. They're not human readable because end of the day, I think humans have to be empowered to make the decision
Yep.
better. But procuring the data and synthesizing and understanding that is 80% of the work. That's wasted effort. And what you bring to the table with Autonomize and this idea of having multiple agents that can, and here's the beauty in software, right? So you don't need just one agent. You can have slightly different agents with slightly different sort of weights that could score each other and give the sort of output, and you pick the best of the.
Exactly.
There are many ways to like sort of
Exactly.
like roll this out, and the cost curve for like deploying these are going down dramatically. Like I said, like we crack the CPU, we can run a small language model on CPU, which means that you just need like data center CPUs to run these things. But going back to what you're saying, like I think if the agents can talk and get the summary of different types of data, so a human makes decision on about care, we are getting rid of like the huge administrative burden cost that's like 30% of our like 4.5 trillion dollar of our healthcare economy is basically admin burden which spread over in
Yep.
many different ways. We can start taking chunks away, and then you bring the same thing for fraud, waste, and abuse. That's another 20-30% in the system, and we can get more efficiencies. Now obviously this is a coordinated effort across so many stakeholders, but I think this is what keeps the optimism for me comes from the fact that for the first time we actually have a good tool that
Yep.
can get us there, right? And this is like electricity in my mind. That's what's really like happened here. So this will change how we will do things in the future.
I love it. I love that. It is definitely electricity, and it's electrifying to be in the space and doing this with you guys too, right? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
one, talking about the other flip side of this, right? Trust, and
Hmm.
you have these agents, but then are they going to go rogue? Guardrails, all of that kind of stuff. So,
Hmm.
explore a little bit about like two things, right? One is how do you balance the reliance on AI and these agents with human cognitive experience, expertise, and oversight and decision making? That's one. There's a lot of frameworks evolving. Just explore
Hmm.
that thought for me a little bit. And then definitely the other side, I want to
Yeah.
also hear about
I mean,
how
this is
practically can we address that today. Right? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and by the way, we take trust and safety as the most paramount item in wanting to build this AI, and to like sort of like tell a few things there. So one, we don't want to build an AI that makes decision on a click, right? So we don't want to do that because I think that has to be still very explainable, reasonable, as in reasoned with, and we don't want to apply AI to make automated decisions, right? So that's very important. But there are a lot of inefficiencies in the system where we can enable to make that decision sooner or faster for humans. That's where we are trying to apply AI. Like prior auth is a great example, right? So bringing the right information contextually so a human can make that decision is fantastic, and reducing that time there is obviously, like, the big win. So trust and safety starts by at the earliest level for us, right? So when we take a language model, uh, out of the box, these language models obviously hallucinate. So we really cannot use the generative bits of these models out of the box. So we actually use the models in slightly different ways, not generative aspects all the time, but we have to build RAG-based system. That's a to me, I think that's an invariant. I think there is a theory that, like, you could obviously feed all of this into the
Context
model and
window.
build a more fine-tuned slash trained
Yeah.
models. I'm still not convinced we are there yet in terms of like
No,
its ability
can I
not to
say something?
hallucinate.
Can I
So
say something
yeah,
there? It's like
yeah,
imagining
absolutely,
that you
yeah,
can find people with perfect memory and then stuff everything that you want to do into
yeah,
their memory at that moment and say, now making decisions about 15 different things, right? The whole context
yes.
window conversation. But you're exactly right. And people,
Yeah, and
yeah,
if you look at the way the models behave based on how you like sort of prompt it or invoke it, it can come up with like different responses, even if its memory is perfect. But its
yeah,
generative aspects will, by nature of it, like have a certain level of like hallucination aspects to it. That's the whole predictability of
absolutely.
the next word that comes from there. So we need to like build extremely well engineered, highly sophisticated data engineered systems. And this is where, like, working with Autonomize helps us get to market faster, because thinking about like how do you curate the data, what's in the data, how do you use the right embeddings, how do you tell the RAG system that small language models need to like look at it as its short-term memory, but also its long-term memory to some extent, because we want to fine-tune the models as well. And then on top of that, we need to measure a lot of metrics, right? So we are actually measuring like sort of like what's the output of a certain thing that came out of the, say, the language model, and then we make sure that there is human in the loop in some sense, right? So if it's an end user, we are obviously getting feedback from the end user in, like, say, copilots or chat based systems. But if it's not an end user based system, let's say where we're operationalizing our clinical workflows, nothing goes outside before like a clinician actually looks at things, right? Or the clinical team looks at things. They're giving us constant feedback, right? So that's all those feedbacks are constantly like coming back. So obviously, like, reinforcement learning with human feedback is one thing. Anthropic pushed that boundary there with AI based feedback. So we've not explored that. That may be in the future for us. But for us, it's about measuring, understanding these things, knowing what's risky, having the right thresholds, alerting, and not using these in the risky scenarios, but using these in like operational workflow scenarios where we are seeing a lot of gain.
No, fascinating. I mean, like outside of the techniques around like, showing, provenance and, we're trying to source and cite
Mm-hmm.
everything that you see, restricting the unintended use of these kind of super broad models where it's not
Mm-hmm.
interpretable or explainable. The RAG-based systems for having almost perfect long-term and medium-term memory, all of that stuff. But the most fundamental thing, what you said early on, is what, strikes me the best, right? Which is like, just get to the basics, define the jobs to be done, right? If you get that right,
Yes.
if you really think about it, take any complex process and you can break down into the right jobs to be done, then you can pick. Then it's like, right now Chat GPT is the hammer looking for a nail. Everybody has a nail, everybody's a hammer right now, right?
True.
And
Yeah.
if you really break it down into like the jobs to be done and you break it thing, I mean, even prior auth, like we actually noticed that we were like, originally it was like the ultimate thing of an AI nurse generating the summary out of everything. And then you
Mm-hmm.
go, and then, outside of the trust and the, adoption issue that we ran into, we
Mm-hmm.
also noticed that, like, no, people are trying to solve basic problems. They're like, hey, can you automate the intake of my faxes and all this multi-structured data into a place?
Yeah.
Can you automate me having to search this entire PDF repository for compliance guidelines and match it? Can you automatically match it? Can you adjudicate it for me? And then that
Hmm.
goes into saying, okay, now you have all that data. Now go look at the claims data, some of the other multimodal data set, and generate that summary for me. But if you start with, I'm going to generate the summary for you
Hmm.
at the other end, you're going to,
Hmm.
that's when you run into trouble. We're saying, okay, I'm just going to go use an LLM to go push this in through. It'll work great in pilots and POCs. When you put it in production,
Yeah.
right, it won't, right? Um,
I mean, this you bring up a very important point. Like going to production versus like obviously sitting there building as a POC, there is a huge level of difference, right? So one of the question I get asked is like, oh, this is replacing engineering. Like it can write code. I actually would say that this brings back the need for rigorous engineering and the discipline of like understanding data and having AI governance specifically, and these things become very important. So obviously, like as engineers we get like benefits from like being more productive, but going to production is about engineering high quality system, especially with language models, and knowing where it will work and where it won't work, right? So it's easy to go wrong with a model
yeah,
very quickly because it looks like a big hammer, right? So I'm looking for all those small nails. It doesn't exist. So this to me, I think that discipline thinking is very
that's
critical. Yeah.
awesome. Bring out the most human of what we're really good at, the critical thinking, aid that and augment that
Yep.
with the model. And actually, this has been fascinating. One last call out, I think, and I want to say, like, so we're Autonomize is a finalist in the AI category at South by Southwest, the pitch competition in 2024.
Ooh,
Here's your official
congrats.
invite to come to Austin during the week of March 9th.
Thank you so
So
much.
please do.
I'm excited and
And
stoked. I've never been to
thank
one.
you. No, but
So,
I do think there's a fundamental, what you just said, right? Like, bringing all of this discussions together. I think the huge opportunity with AI is really, make Iron Man out of every Tony Stark out there, right? Meaning you can give them the Jarvis suit that's going to extend their cognitive abilities,
Mhm,
their memory abilities, their analysis abilities, data mining
mhm,
abilities. And no one needs it more than the knowledge worker population in the world, right? And all the
absolutely.
automation that
Yep.
we have done in software all this while, but primarily focused on, honestly, blue collar jobs and non-knowledge work tasks, because
Mhm,
knowledge work is hardly innately harder to automate, right? And I think with this crop
mhm,
of AI and this the where the market is right now with all the research that's coming out, to me that's the big aha opportunity, right? It's like, how do you really give a Jarvis suit
mhm.
to turn every Tony Stark into an Iron Man, right? So huge opportunity.
Yep.
Um,
That's 100%. And if you think about it, I think it's a very astute observation. Automation in the past has been on manual labor work, but I think this automation will be about getting efficiencies, but also like sort of increasing the capacity of what humans can do, especially around the knowledge and
yeah,
skills, because skills have been like you skills takes like a lot of time to like build, right? So these are not like human sort of like mechanical skills that we are teaching ourselves, but these are like knowledge skills, and a lot of that is like like making these connections in through experience and heuristics and like obviously like well-known patterns, which is in our brains in certain ways. So bringing that into sort of something that becomes repeatable, I think, is where we are going, right? So it's fascinating. It's great to be
it's
doing
great to be
this.
doing
Yeah.
this. Now,
Yeah.
one last question to you around, advice for the, kids getting out of college, entrepreneurs and builders and
Mm.
stuff. What's you've done a lot of different things in your life. What's your advice to all of them, in when they're actually either starting their career or starting their companies or thinking
Mhm.
about it in this time?
Right. I mean, I've always taken the plunge to learn something. So maybe I'll caveat my advice with, like my biases. Um, uh, so I really think that this is the best time to actually learn how can you change something using tools like AI, but also knowing where it's not applicable, right? So first thing, obviously, like, this, just learn this. This is an actually easily usable
Mm,
AI, unlike the past versions of AI, where you needed a certain level of like ground based level of knowledge, which would always strip most
yeah,
people off. But this one is a very practically useful, usable technology, right? So it doesn't take long for you to like apply this. I mean, you're not everybody should be a researcher, so people who are applying this should be using this. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is like the risk for trying things is almost zero or marginal. And when I say that, I'm not saying that go build an AI for flying planes, but what I mean by that is like, basically trying this for hobby projects are like the cost for this is almost zero. It's your human cost. If there are already open models that are close to zero, or like even GPT is like pretty affordably cheap for trying things. So just try, like build stuff, show it out there, put things out there for people to like, use and give feedback. So I think that working with a community is the right way. And then there are so many great communities out there in open that are trying to do things. Even in healthcare, healthcare is not as open, but there are communities there that are trying to like push what's possible in open source and other places. So I would say those are the places like anybody new without necessarily like a lot of computer science or AI background. This is very tangibly useful right now for people to try and do
That's
things.
awesome. Akshay, such a pleasure. What a great conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Where can the
Thank you,
viewers
man.
and listeners find you on the internet? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, I definitely am more active on LinkedIn now as I've reduced my social media presence. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Akshay Sharma Lyric. I should show up. I'm also on Twitter. I'm not been as active in the last 6 months, but I aim to get back. So you can find me at my full name at Akshay Sharma is my actual handle. So you can find me there. But always like, Akshay.Sharma at lyric.ai, shoot me an email. I'm happy to like, converse. And I want to say, Ganesh, this has been a great conversation. It feels like, we're continuing to like have this conversation over and over. And I think every time we talk, there is something new that you have learned that you're sharing with me. And I'm
Same
doing
thing.
certain
Yeah.
things that I'm sharing with you. We should do it more
Yeah,
often. So
absolutely. No,
our
I'm
cadence should
already signing you
be slow.
for my next season. You're going to come back in anyways, so we should
Thank
probably
you.
do it more, more often than
And see you last.
seasons. But no, no, thank you so much for spending the time, and I learned so much with this interaction. And like you said, very selfishly, I do this because I enjoyed this conversation and the learning from it. This is my accelerated learning too, right? So, really appreciate the time. Thank you
It's
so
great.
much for taking the time today, and
Thank you.
fascinating. Have a great rest of the week.